Now, the Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, seems to have awakening as she says that her party's previous target of reaching net zero by 2050 is impossible. Meanwhile, the government is looking for a new low-carbon chief and is offering an annual salary equivalent to an astonishing £255,000 per year. That, of course, is significantly more than the Prime Minister's salary. I'm delighted to say I'm now joined in the studio by the Conservative peer, Lord Craig Mackinlay, and still I'm joined by Chris Hope. Craig, absolute delight to have you in the studio as ever, my friend. Could I ask you about Kemi Badenoch's sudden awakening to the net zero project, something you've been shining a light on for quite some time? You must be relieved.
I'm very relieved. I mean, it's sort of broken this consensus that had been across all the parties for too long, that this net zero pathway was set in stone, we're going to get there no matter what the cost. Now, I'm very pleased that Kemi has said, well, hold on, let's have a reality check here. And I think it is time that we do a bit more of this. Where we've made mistakes in the past, and I have to say the Conservative Party made a lot of mistakes in the last Parliament, to put our hands up and say, yeah, we're in opposition now, we've learnt the lesson, and we're going to crack on with some sensible policies. And opening up the box of net zero to put it back on to some sort of track that's affordable and sensible. And let's not forget the rest of the world is saying, oh, we are boo to that. Give us more of your high-energy industries. Let's export them to China and then put the products on a diesel ship back to the UK. So, yeah, I'm very pleased.
Excellent. Chris?
Well, I can recall, Craig Mackinlay, when you had sepsis in hospital running a rebellion against the electric vehicle mandate without any arms or legs. I mean, that's how much you believe in this. And somehow you brought Kemi Badenoch back on track. But it really is a Tory mistake here, isn't it? She said that, I think she spoke against the net zero in that 90-minute debate with no division of the House of Commons. There's still been never any vote on this net zero mandate.
Well,
and why is it in 2050? Why not 2049 or 2051? What's the reason?
Well, I mean, the rest of the world is saying 20 never, frankly. I mean, if you look at the output of CO2 of the UK now, it's sort of bumbling along at the bottom, barely a rounding error, and China's taking off still like a rocket. And that's without India finding its own coal reserves, without Indonesia, without Africa. This has become a nonsense that is just beggaring one country in this world, and it's us. I mean, whatever you think about the Trump regime, he's going cheap energy, drill baby drill. You will have a relocation of Western factories from Europe and the UK to either the US or China, wherever there's cheap energy. You cannot have net zero and growth. They do not land together in a sentence.
Lord Mackinlay, you refer, of course, to that telephone call between Putin and Trump as just finished, and a big conversation will be, what does peace look like moving forward? And a huge talking point is, should we deploy British troops into Ukraine as part of peacekeeper? And Chris Hope spoke to Nigel Farage earlier on, and Priti Patel.
Well, we asked a question of the Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, and should MPs get a vote on this measure? She said there should be consensus across the House of Commons without saying a vote. But then we did speak to Priti Patel and Nigel Farage with this very question, and here's what they told us on GB News.
I am very nervous about putting British troops into Ukraine, and I'll tell you why. Troops were put into Korea at the end of the Korean War. 71 years later, there are still 25,000 American troops in Korea. If we're going to make a commitment to Ukraine, number one, the army isn't big enough. And number two, how long is it for? What are the rules of engagement? There's a lot of questions here. And I have no doubt if Keir Starmer was to do this without a vote in Parliament, there'd be uproar.
Right. You heard Kemi say that this should come to a vote in Parliament. That means a full discussion and debate about this. We don't want to put our amazing armed forces, our servicemen and women, personnel in harm's way. We need to have full transparency as to what this would consist of. This is the stage that we're at. We need answers to many of our questions right now, and we're not getting them.
So, Lord Craig Mackinlay, there we have two political voices saying there should be a vote on this. It is a momentous decision. There'll be lots and lots of people out there who remember the Iraq War only too well. Do you think that this should go to a vote?
Well, constitutionally, you have the royal prerogative that the government can exercise. Now, that has to remain, I think, a short, sharp royal prerogative if you want an overnight attack on the Houthis, for instance. You wouldn't be coming to Parliament before that happened. But what we're considering here will be a very long-term, drawn-out process. I happen to think 30,000 troops on the ground around. I'm not entirely sure what they're going to do, but that's another issue. But I think this being a very long-term commitment, it could run into years. Yes, I think it has to be debated in Parliament. Of course, we've got an elected dictatorship in Parliament at the moment, and Labour will get their way. But yes, there should be, these type of issues should be aired. So I agree with with both Nigel and Prissy there.
Yeah, I mean, even 30,000 is almost that's more than nearly half the size of the armed forces at the moment. And maybe huge question marks whether that can be matched. And the big issue is if our boys and girls are fired on by Russia, can they shoot back? I'm not even sure that's clear, and that's why I think Parliament needs to hear more.
Well, you probably have, Keir Starmer will line up some human rights lawyers to give them an answer on the field, which is, I'm afraid, seems to be the status of warfare at the moment. But, yeah, all of these big issues, what are going to be the rules of engagement? And, of course, if Russia does overstep a mark, if there was a peacekeeping force, is America going to help or not?
And we heard that from
Nigel
Farage there said, look at South Korea, you've still got tens of thousands of US troops there decades later. Is that the commitment we're looking at? A decades-long deployment of UK troops in Ukraine?
Well, it's certainly possible, I suppose. I mean, I don't think any of us can be comfortable with the meat grinder that's going on for both Ukraine young men and women and Russian young men and women. We can't be happy with that. So there has to be a conclusion. But you can't have a conclusion where the aggressor seems to win. No. But it's a complex one, of course. But these are the type of things we could have a debate in Parliament about. Yes. Doesn't mean you'd actually have a conclusion any different from the first blush of what's going to happen. But, yeah, Parliament is the place for these things.
And of course, all of this might amount to a row of beans anyway. I mean, who knows what was said between Putin and Trump a short while ago on the phone. Vladimir Putin has been resolute all along. He will not stand for any deployment of foreign troops in Ukraine. What are you hoping to come out of this conversation on the telephone today for the future of Ukraine?
Well, I'm certainly hoping there can be a deal where Putin can withdraw to pre-war boundaries, but I don't think that's on the agenda for President Trump. I think he's willing to see peace under any measure, frankly. I mean, I'm disturbed that the country that has been invaded is not part of these talks. I think we're all disturbed about that. And if Europe's going to provide the peacekeeping troops, then it needs to be part of these discussions as well. This is an unholy mess of which I haven't got an obvious answer. And I think that's fair to say of everybody involved in this discussion at the moment. But Trump and Putin, I hate to guess what went on in that conversation.
Well, we've actually got some breaking lines on this here, so keep you up to date on what happened in that phone call. And apparently, according to the Kremlin and the White House, Putin has agreed now to halt strikes on energy infrastructure for 30 days. That, of course, constitutes a limited ceasefire, but nevertheless, that is a breakthrough. And the White House have now also said that the leaders spoke broadly about the Middle East being an area of potential cooperation to prevent future conflicts there. So a huge amount of detail yet to come out of that historic telephone conversation. Lord Craig Mackinlay, thank you very much for joining us, and also Chris Hope, excellent as ever.